So before we go to the next section, I wanted to stop and see if we had any special questions.
There is one, but I think we should save it for a different section.
Okay,
so I see
fair enough.
Mason, but it fits better in another section than in with what do we believe.
Okay, fair enough. We'll come back to it then. All right, so our next little section here is a very short history of the Green Party. That history is actually also fairly complex and long at this point. So that would be its own whole presentation, which maybe we'll do one day if you're interested. But we'll give you kind of a summary, because I think it's important to show that the Green Party didn't just come out of nowhere. And it's not an like this sudden thing, right? Like there's been this push historically for this type of politics for a really long time, because the Democrats have been fighting against this type of politics for a really long time. And it's not just a movement in the U.S. It's a global movement for this type of politics, because everybody globally is facing a lot of the same problems: climate change and imperialism and all this stuff. So, it's a growing movement that we'll come to. So, very, very short summaries on the slide. So green politics, roughly speaking, you can kind of trace back to the turbulent period, so to speak, of around the 60s, when there were many different movements that were fighting for various forms of liberation and freedom. So we had like the civil rights movement, we had feminist movements, we had peace movements against war. We also had the beginnings of the modern environmental movement that was recognizing all of the environmental damage that was being done by fossil fuels and imperialism, for that matter. Nuclear energy, all of these things. And all of these movements, pushed to get legislation and change with varying amounts of success. Some of it was adopted, not all of it was adopted. Oh, excuse me. What was interesting was that many of these movements ended up adopting very similar strategies, where they all started to rely very heavily on these very decentralized democratic methods of organizing themselves to take direct action by organizing marches or getting in the streets and occupying things and stuff like that. And a lot of those ideas were built up on readings from past socialists and anarchist theorists, including folks like Murray Bookchin, who we'll talk about here in a moment, who all very much emphasize these very democratic, bottom-up methods of organizing for social change. And so they want some change, but not all change. And you ended up having an interesting kind of inflection point in history there in the 60s, 70s or so, where some of these policies were kind of begrudgingly accepted by some of the Democratic Party. Not even all of it, but just kind of some of it, like what they could sort of, roll their eyes and do, right, while maintaining power and maintaining control of the capitalist system and all that stuff, right? But they didn't do everything. And so you had this kind of split where some folks said, well, to continue the fight, we should join the Democratic Party. And you had other folks that said, we need to continue an independent movement. So you had kind of this split here. And you could trace a lot of organizations, including, for example, DSA is very popular in recent years. It started around this time period when they were trying to push people saying, no, instead of being independent socialist, you should join the Democratic Party, because look, they did a couple of things after we protested for years. And so you had this big debate about that. And so I think kind of the history speaks for itself over the past 50, 75 years, that the Democratic Party lives up to its reputation as the graveyard of progressive movements, that everyone who joined those, like, they've gotten suppressed and silenced. And it's been these independent movements that have kind of kept the tradition alive and pushed for more and more change over time. And the Green Party kind of came out of those traditions, that people from these various groups, civil rights movement, feminist movements, environmental movements, the peace movement, the ones that wanted to continue independent working class struggle, started to get together to talk about how we can do that. And in the early 1980s, there was inspiration from Germany. The Germans founded the German Green Party and quickly won a bunch of offices in national office in Germany based on a very green politics platform. So the idea was, hey, maybe we should do that in the U.S. And so these organizations, they sent representatives and they talked about it. What will it take to create a Green Party here in the U.S.? And that led to talks and it eventually formed a Green Party. There's more complexity to that, of course, but the grass. But that's why we were saying earlier that the Green Party is both a political party and an activist organization, because through this history, you see that the party was created by activists that came from these various social movements that put all of their ideas together. You can essentially see the four pillars there, right? Like social justice, peace, environmentalism, combined with democratic methods of organizing. That's our four pillars. That's the people that created the Green Party. So that, led to creating this independent Green Party. The original Green Party in the 1990s was very focused on political education. There was kind of a separate Green Party, so to speak, that formed to focus more on campaigns. And those two Green Parties more or less merged in 2000 to create the Green Party of the United States that exists today. So again, we have that roots that sometimes causes some tension inside because of a lot of discussion and debate and all around what's the right tactics and strategy to use. But we still have those roots of both being an activist organization, focused on action and political education, as well as that political party that runs candidates. And today we see those as you have to do both in order to keep organizing right now. It's necessary to do both to really build community power to the point where we can really take further action once we get there. But for now, we have to kind of pursue all directions, right? So, what are your thoughts, Chris?
Yeah, I mean, I say it every time we do this, right? At that 1984 meeting in Minnesota, when the Green Party was originally founded in the United States, Howie was there as a representative of the Clamshell Alliance, of an anti-nuclear movement that he was a founder of, a co-founder of, right? And other people were there representing other movements. So it really is an activist organization at its core. There are problems with that, right? I'm very quick usually to say that the Green Party remains an individual activist organization, that we didn't know. We didn't take all of that and actually unify it into a common intersectional platform, right? So in many ways, the parts of the Green Party are still a collection of issues activists that don't necessarily agree across issues and have never come to a common worldview and a common perspective. So that's one of our the barriers within the Green Party. And then, like Garrett said, I think it's really, really, really important for people to understand that it's not either elections or movements. It has to be both. It has to be both, right? If you're only running in elections, why would someone support you? You show up every 2 years to run for a position of power, right? If you're not involved in the movements in your community, why do you actually deserve support, right? Because platforms are words, and frankly, words ain't shit, especially in American politics, especially in American politics, right? The largest voting bloc in any election is non-voters, and people have a lot of reasons they attribute to that, but I think it's mainly alienation. It's not being represented. It's having politicians that lie to you to your face when they're on the campaign trail with no intention of following through when they're in office, right? It's decades of communities taking the bait and supporting someone only to find out that they don't have their back on the other side. So it's, running elections only leaves us, disconnected from our community. On the other side, if we're only involved in movements, where are we directing our energy? Where are we directing for solution? Where are we pointing to solutions? If we're not running movement candidates on an independent ballot line, we're directing them into the Democratic Party, right? We're directing them into, seeing the movement ideals and this movement solutions at best watered down before passage, and at worst completely abandoned and in the middle just tokenized, like the Green New Deal, right? It's something you yell on a campaign trail, but you don't say anything about it or do anything real when it comes to time to do it. So it's got to be both, right? We're involved in the movements, we build relationships and trust, because if we're going to run political campaigns and we want to activate non-voters, which should be the primary target of Greens. If we want to do that, we have to build trust, because that, for good reason, the non-voters of America don't trust politicians. They don't trust political parties. So we have to build their trust on the other side of this. We have to build it by showing up in our communities, by joining movements, by putting skin in the game, by being shoulder to shoulder with them in their fights. When we do that, and then we say, hey, I'm going to run for state senate or state house or city council or president, right? Any of them. Now they know you. They already trust you. They have been there with you. They've sweated with you. They know you're going to follow through on their words. And if not, we have democratic organizations that will hold you accountable, right? So it's absolutely essential that Greens get over this idea of movement versus electoralism and embrace movement and electoralism. Because we'll never win with one without the other.
Yeah, for sure. So, before we move on, I want to kind of just chat about some of these images over here, because if you're more, Chris has one of them. So if you're interested in learning a little bit more about the history of the Green Party, and even we got two copies. So if you want to learn a little bit more about the history of the Green Party and some of the ideas and the principles and philosophy and such that go into the Green Party and what green politics is, some of these might be interesting for you. So the first one on the left there is the Ecology of Freedom, which is a classic book by Murray Bookchin, although he wrote a bunch of other stuff. And that may not even necessarily be the first book you should read because it's kind of a dense thing. But the idea, the reason I put him there was because of Bookchin's influence on many of the early Green Party, including I mentioned the early Green Party that was founded in 1991, that was focused on organizing and political education and activism, was largely inspired by a lot of his political philosophy, which is based in kind of his own unique take on socialist organizing with understanding how human society and nature should interact to create an ecological, sustainable type of society. So, we kind of have this interesting eco-socialist influence from people like Murray Bookchin that might be interesting for you to look up. The book in the middle there is the first book that was specifically published on green politics from the point of view of the German Green Party that was founded in 1980 that I mentioned. As the U.S. Green Party was founded, many other countries around the world also started to found their own green parties because they were also encouraged by the success of the German Green Party. So it became a global movement during that time period. But the kind of the first success story, so to speak, was the German Green Party, which has its own challenges and things that we should learn from history, because what started as a very radical, more socialist-leaning Green Party has now become a much more liberal Green Party today in Europe, which doesn't necessarily support all of the same things. So that that's a lesson that we need to learn from, I think, about how we should organize to win and what does it mean to win, right? Do we win if we get liberal policy? I don't necessarily think so. We want to try to change how the system works. But that's an interesting historical record, and you can see in there where it talks about how the early German Green Party was, they had like socialists and all in their meetings. It wasn't, a liberal movement or whatever in the beginning. The third one there is Petra Kelly, who became one of the biggest spokespeople for the German Green Party and the European Greens in general. And she has a number of essays that are actually really great that really talk about peace and what it means to be ecological and what it means to be a feminist in the modern society. And so if you're looking for more essays about kind of what does it mean for green politics, I think her writings are really great introduction to that. And then finally at the bottom, there's a clip from C-SPAN here, which is when the Green Party was originally founded in 1991, the original one that existed before the Green Party of the United States. This is its conference when they formed, and you can see the guy on the right there is Howie Hawkins. He was there at the original press conference. And it's really fascinating to listen on C-SPAN to all of them talk, because they're calling out the Democrats for exactly the same things that are going on today, that like nothing has changed. If anything, the Democrats have gotten worse since then. And so, the imperative to form an independent green movement that they talked about then is even more imperative today, because we're, the challenges that they were talking about then, like climate change is 50 years away. Well, now it's only 10 years away. All of these things are much more urgent, and the reason to build an independent movement is more important than ever. So that's a great listen to learn more about green values and why we need an independent party. And
I put the link to that video in the chat, so you can go and watch the 1991 C-SPAN and Howie.
Yep. So a little bit of history there. So just a reminder again, because of all this history, we're an activist organization and electoral party, and we have to make these things work together. And I think, Chris mentioned that there's a habit sometimes of kind of siloing some of the issues apart from each other, and we have to resist that. And I think policy like the Green New Deal is really great at breaking those silos and recognizing how these issues are interrelated. So I think that's why it's so important for the Green Party to adopt. Well, we already adopted, but to keep campaigning on a Green New Deal and keep encouraging that sort of policy that's very intersectional.